Testing, testing. All right, hello Java. We are going to look at our program assignment for chapter 4, and I'm just kind of glancing down the assignment lesson plan. And I did share some sample code with you. That's a full solution. It's just for you to copy and paste and execute, test, study. That's a full program, so it's ready to go. And I talked about logic and syntax in a prior recording. Today we're going to look at our program assignment for chapter 4. It's page 147, exercise 4.20. So looking at that, we're going to be calculating a salary. Develop a Java application that determines the gross pay for each of 3 employees. The company pays straight time for 40 hours worked by each employee and time and a half for all hours worked in excess of 40 hours. You're given a list of employees, their number of hours worked last week, and their hourly rates. Your program should input this information for each employee, then determine and display the employee's gross pay. Use Class Scanner to input the data. All right, so on your lesson plan for the wages.java application, I've typed the given data. So the data that you should use for employee 1, hourly rate of pay is $12.50, and hours worked are 50. And your program will calculate the pay. Employee 2, rate of pay is $27 and hours worked is 40. And employee 3, again, hourly rate is $8.25 and the employee worked 30 hours. So we're going to need to think about calculating hourly rate of pay times the number of hours worked with allowance for overtime pay, and then display that the earned wages in an appropriate format. So for program 4, this is our wages.java program. We're going to call it wages.java for a file name. And we remember that file name and the class name must be the same. Strict rules for Java syntax, I guess. So let's see. We're going to be counting our employees, so an integer will work for that variable. We need a rate of pay, and that's dollars and cents, so type double is fine. We need to somehow store the hours that a person worked, and that could be double, 30.5 hours a week, so we'll declare a double type for hours, and then we're going to calculate the pay, and of course that's dollars and cents, so double will be fine. Now notice that in this program, class wages will calculate, all the input is via the keyboard, and a direct immediate calculation displays each employee's total pay. We are not setting up employee 1 to house certain data as an object, a new instance of an employee object. We're not setting up an account object to maintain its own instance variables. So I don't have a separate class or several classes to maintain objects in current memory. Instead, wages.java contains the main method. So we will execute directly from wages.java and run the program. So our main method, we were told to use the scanner input to allow for variable input via the keyboard. We're going to assign our count for our employee count to number 1, starting. We're going to repeat this calculation for 3 employees. So while, if I have a while open brace to start a while statement, I do want to make sure that I have an and close while. And you should always document your braces. So I have my documentation and while. So I'm entering the while. Count is less than or equal to 3. Now count, because it is in the condition of the while, has to have been previously assigned its started value. We say that the condition of the while has to be primed. So count, if it has an unknown value, we don't have control of the condition. And yes, we did previously assign count to 1. So count is assigned, while count, which is equal to 1, is less than or equal to 3. That is true. We'll execute the body of the while. Entering the body of the while, we want to prompt the user to enter an hourly rate for employee 1. Our count on our employee is employee 1. Rate is assigned input as a double value from the keyboard. Prompt the user to enter the hours worked by this employee. Hours is assigned a double input via the keyboard. And now we're ready to calculate the wages for this employee. Now, if the hours worked is greater than 40, we have to calculate our overtime pay. And overtime pay, we get our straight time pay, which is 40 hours times the rate, plus we get whatever hours over 40 we worked at time and a half. So this employee's hours, we subtract 40, the base rate, and that would give us the difference, the number of hours over 40 times the rate times 1.5. Rate at standard 40-hour rate and rate at time and a half, 1.5. So if this employee's hours are greater than 40, we'll calculate the overtime pay. Else, we'll pay straight time pay, which is the total hours worked by this employee times this employee's rate. We've calculated employee 1, so we're ready to provide an output report for this employee. System.out print formatted. We have a string pay for employee space, the integer value, space is space, $sign. We're going to use a double formatted to 2 places following the decimal point, and then a new line. And the variables we're going to use in this string are count, which is an integer, and pay, which is a double. We're still operating within the while loop, so we're going to increment the variable of the while condition. We have to make sure that at some point in time, the condition of the while does indeed test false. So if we increment count, and it started at 1. At some point in time, 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, plus 1 would be 4. We're going to exceed the condition of the while, so that our while test will test false. So at some point in time, we're continuing to increment count as a reassignment at the end of the while. When we come back to the while loop, we'll test count's value and determine whether this condition is true or false. And we're assuring ourselves that at some point in time, if we continue to increment count, it will exceed our maximum value in the test. So this time, 1 plus 1 would be 2. We end the while, so we return to the top of the while loop. Back at the while, count is now equal to 2. 2 remains less than or equal to 3, so we will execute the body of the loop and input a double for this employee's rate, input a double for this employee's hours, calculate the wages for this employee, determining if the hours are over 40. If the hours worked are over 40, we'll be calculating with our overtime expression and assigning a double pay. Else, we'll be calculating a straight time expression and assign pay, which is a double. So for this employee, we know the rate, the hours worked, and we've calculated the correct pay. So again, we're ready to print a report, a well-formatted report with a pay for employee properly spaced. We're going to use an input of the integer current value for count is, and we're using our string formatted for a double to 2 places following the decimal point, and pay will be placed in that string, formatted string, and also create a new line. The report's been printed as output. We're going to increment the variable of the while just before we exit the while. Count was 2. If we increment it, it's 3. We'll go back to the while condition. At the top of the while, count is 3. 3 is less than or equal to 3. So we will execute the body of the loop again to process and calculate the input and the pay for this employee, and print the output report for this employee. We'll increment count. Count is 3 plus 1 would be 4. We go back to the top of the while and test while count. Count is now 4. Is 4 less than or equal to 3? No, that tests false. So we exit the body of the while. We exit the while and continue with the next line immediately following the while, which is our close brace and main. And next is our close brace and class wages. So let's look at the code in NetBeans. Okay, I've created my new project. My project, I called my project folder CH04_20. I've created my new file, wages.java, and it exists in the Java homework folder on my C drive. I have my required beginning documentation, which of course yours looks a little different than this. we're going to import the java.util.scanner class so we can input from the keyboard. And then I notice public class wages is the name of this class, and wages is the name of the Java file with an uppercase. That's upper lowercase requirements within Java. So uppercase is sensitive in Java. Here we see our public static void main. So this program will be the driver program, and there is no need for separate class objects to maintain their own instance variables for this assignment. So this application file, we're going to begin execution with the main class. Scanner, we're assigning the variable input equals new scanner system.in will allow us to accept variable input via the keyboard. We're declaring that count, our variable count, is an integer and it's equal to 1, so we're declaring its data type and assigning it a starting value, and we know that we have one employee, at least one employee, so we're going to assign count to 1. Count represents the number of employees. We're going to repeat the calculation for our 3 employees, and we are hard coding constants in this case just for ease of programming. In our while program, while driver, there's our while with the open brace. We want to make sure that there's a closing matching brace for our end while, and that should be documented. Within the while, we are going to print our prompt to the user. Please enter the hourly rate for this employee. We're declaring that rate is a double, and it's being assigned the double that the user hopefully types at the keyboard. We don't have any error trapping in this program at this point. We're prompting the user to enter the number of hours worked by this employee, and again, hours as a variable is declared to be of type double, and it's being assigned the double that the user types at the keyboard, hopefully. No error trapping has been built in. And then we're declaring double our variable pay, which will be a calculated value for representing gross pay for this employee. Next, we're going to calculate the wages. Now, if the employee works more than 40 hours, then we have to calculate the overtime pay for that employee. And overtime pay is equal to 40 hours times the rate. If the employee worked over 40 hours, he's going to get a straight time pay of 40 hours times his rate. But the hours over 40, so we're going to find the difference. Hours minus 40 would be the hours worked as overtime. Overtime hours are multiplied times time and a half times your rate. So you get straight time plus half time. Pay is calculated for overtime pay. If hours is greater than 40, if hours is equal to 40 or less than 40, then this will test false and we'll do the else portion, and pay will be calculated as straight time, hours times rate. We're now ready to print a nice little payroll report for this employee using a printed format string. Open with your quotes. Pay for employee %D is $, %.2f %n close string. Well, the text is going to be quoted as output. So pay for employee space. We're going to fit an integer into the %D location. Count is an integer, so it'll be 1 for this first time through our while loop. Space is space $. We're looking for a double to fit the string, the formatted string .2f, where we're floating 2 places following the decimal point, and then we're going to create a new line. So we've input the necessary values for each employee to calculate their pay for this week. We printed a formatted report. We're now ready to increment count. Count is the variable within the while condition, and the variable within the while condition must be reassigned typically just before we exit the while. We must reassign the variable of the condition of the while so that at some point in time, after we execute repeatedly the while loop, at some point in time, the condition of the while must test false. So the variable must be reassigned during each iteration. So we're going back up to while. Count is now incremented by 1 to 2. While 2 is less than or equal to 3. That is true. So we'll execute the body of the while again, receiving necessary data input from the keyboard, determining whether this employee will be paid overtime pay or not, printing a report. As a programmer, it's our responsibility to make sure that the condition variable of the while is reassigned, typically just before we exit the while, to go back and test the condition of the while, and at some point indeed determine that it's false. So let's go ahead and run this application. Again, your data, your test data, was given to you in your lesson plan. So hourly rate for first employee is 12.5. Hours worked is 50. And our program calculates. Pay for employee 1 is $687.50. Enter hourly rate for the next employee, $27 an hour. Hours worked is 40. This would be an example of an employee working straight time for the week. The pay for the employee 2 is $1,080. And for employee 3, hourly rate is 8.25. And the employee worked 30.5 hours, which would again be an example of straight time pay. And the calculated pay for employee 3 is $251.63. Now your report is well formatted. What I would challenge you to do is run the program again with 3 new test data, testing your overtime calculation by including an employee who works over 40 hours, testing your regular pay for that exactly at 40 hours, and then testing for less than 40 hours, and experimenting with the code. Your directions for submitting this program are within your lesson plan. And very typical directions to submit. I expect the uploaded file name containing your original source code, the application driver file if necessary, the files that do support your program. In this case, wages.java is our application driver program. There are no other classes or class files necessary. And a Word document uploading that contains your output screen. All right, thank you. The next recorded lecture will cover Chapter 5 material. Good luck studying Java. Proud of your work so far.